Dana?
You can ask me anything you want. Yeah.
Was there a time during your illness that, when it was really active, that you felt like giving up and packing it in?
Well, it's funny because the way it went, I got my diagnosis in April 2008, and from the biopsy and other testing, it looked, you know, as I said, it looked like a stage 1 cancer. And so when I had the surgery, just figured, you know, that it hadn't gone beyond the prostate. And so I never felt, to be honest, the only thing that's ever made me feel bad is the treatment. You know, the actual disease is never, you know, never apparently affected me. You know, I was really disappointed when I found out that I had stage 3 cancer. You know, I went, you know, that was just pretty stunning to find that out, and that the cancer had actually escaped from the prostate. But, you know, my doctors treated me aggressively. And as I said, you know, so far so good. But I never felt like I wanted to give up. I have to admit that in the summer of 2009, when, you know, my treatment was finally over, you know, I was losing weight and I was feeling better, I did have a, you know, a real tough bout of depression. It was kind of like, it was as if my mind was finally saying, okay, you know, you can go crawl into the den now, and you know, the worst is past, and now you can read 5 novels a week, which I did. But no. Other questions? Yeah.
How do you manage all the inquiries and responses that must come in to the blog? I imagine it must be very difficult. You must feel like you want to respond personally, but clearly you can't to all these people that you've touched.
Yeah, you know, I was saying earlier today, sometimes, you know, I'll get ambushed on the phone by, you know, someone who wants to talk to me, you know, and I do it politely. But I really, you know, as you can guess, I can't respond to everyone I would like to respond to. And it's one of those weird things where, especially, you know, in our culture now, where the distance continues to close between all of us, you know, I think sometimes some of the readers don't understand is the, you know, that column is what I'm giving them. You know, that's, you know, I don't want to be your cancer buddy. You know, I'm, you know, it's just not what I want to do. Unless you want to pay me. But, but to be honest, as someone who's been a print journalist this whole life, it's a number of times strangers have recognized me. And that's really weird for a print journalist. You know, it's like, you know, it's not even like I'm a 12th tier rock star. You know, it's I'm just a journalist. Yeah.
Let's get away from this particular subject for a second. You're working at the Times as an editor, as a writer. You're at the center of a world which is in very rapid flux right now. And I wonder if you could describe what that's like, what's going on at the paper, how you see the transformation of the New York Times and big media in general.
Yeah, it's stressful. And really one of the interesting changes I've seen probably, I'd say in the last 3 years, is, you know, journalists love to complain. It's just, you know, one of the character traits of being a journalist is complaining. But ever since it's become apparent that, you know, that print journalism is in for a rough ride, I mean, obviously, you know, we still complain about certain things, but there is a sense of all of us understanding that we're in the same ship. and that complaining isn't going to help us, keep the Times afloat. And probably, all of us, I think most of us are doing things that we never expected to do, web-wise. Assignment editors now, besides, assigning stories and working with freelancers, that they have to think about, an audio slideshow that might appear on the web. Think about whether a reporter, is natural in front of the camera and can do 5 minutes of video to complement a story. I think things look pretty good for the Times. I mean, just, demographically, the baby boomers are probably still want to get their fingers dirty reading the newspaper. And it is such a strong brand that, we will weather it. Although I could envision, decades from now where the print version is like a specialty item, kind of, a retro, it's like, well, Andy, I still get the Times in print, it's, it would be kind of like an eccentric quirk. It's hard to be in an industry that's changing rapidly. And I've been talking to students the last couple days, and I think today's students who want to be in the media are going to have to be more creative and more entrepreneurial. They're not, and this isn't necessarily bad. They're not going to necessarily wed their careers to some paternal news organization. They're going to have to hustle, and I think that might be a good thing. Yeah.
To go back in your life a little bit, you said you knew that you wanted to be a writer when you were in 3rd grade. That's fairly improbable. Mm-hmm. To what do you owe that? I mean, was it your teachers? Was it the reading that was done for you? What created that?
Already in 3rd grade, I loved to read. I was just one of those bookworm kids. And I actually vividly remember the moment when I decided I wanted to be a writer. There was a girl who was a grade ahead of me named Cindy Clark. And she had written a story, and she had brought it down to show to the woman who was her 3rd grade teacher and who was mine, Mrs. Constantino. And I was sitting there watching this, and Mrs. Constantino said, that's a really nice story. And I was just sitting there thinking, well, I can do that. And so I went home that day and started writing a novel. It was, I still have it. It's 17 pages long. And for whatever, stubborn little kid reason, from that moment on, I thought of myself as a writer, or at least as a potential writer. And it happened. Yeah.
Have members of your family taken interest in your evolution, development as a writer?
One of the favorite things that my mother says about me is when I do something that puzzles her. Back home they call me Andy. My middle name is Andrew, and Mom will say, "Andy, you sure are different." And it's like, well, no kidding, Mom. And I have to be forthright. And in 2008, I had a book that's partly a memoir that came out, and it's full of difficult family stories, and it really made my mother unhappy. But the problem I faced was, I'm 52 right now, and my parents are 70. If I waited too long, it would be just like my mother to outlive me. And so I had to weigh the consequences of making my mother unhappy with telling these stories that I really wanted to write, and to be honest, I felt that I needed to write. You know, I mean, I thought hard about it, and you know, my sister, who's a year younger than I am, she really likes my writing. You know, in a way, she's one of my ideal readers because she likes to read, and so she's a wonderful reader to have. And my two brothers, I'm not even sure they've read my books. I mean, you know, they're New Hampshire guys, you know. Yeah, Peg.
Dana, I've got two questions for you, if I can remember those. Because you live in the New York metropolitan area, was your cancer treatment more aggressive, more advanced than we might be able to get here? And number two, how did it work with the times? And obviously you couldn't be working full time. How did that all play out?
Well, to answer your second question first, the Times has been great all the way, you know, all the way along. I mean, they're thinking about illness and their employees is progressive, and I've never had a problem, you know, during the whole past 2 years. And I do suspect, although I mean, you know, Boston's not far away, and you know, Dartmouth Medical Center isn't far away, so you know, I wouldn't, you know, I wouldn't have gone to a community hospital in New Jersey to get treated. And I went to the Cancer Institute of New Jersey, who they just have a wonderful oncologist who has a great reputation, and you know, he seemed like the right guy. So, you know, it wasn't as if I was going to go to Mountainside Hospital in Montclair to have my treatment. And really, they just, you know, they looked at me and, you know, saw that I was only in my 50s, and they really treated me aggressively, which I agreed with. Yeah.
I'm Cameron, by the way. I'm the editor of New Hampshire right now. A lot of our staff's here. We're really excited to have you here.
Thanks.
I'm just curious as to what production night kind of stuff was back when you were like, obviously, you didn't use like InDesign like we do now, so I guess I'm just kind of curious to see how.
Well, it was, you know, it was fun and crazy, like I assume it still is. You know, we were at a stage where we were using cold type. You know, we would print out film from a CompuGraphic typesetting machine, and then we would cut it up and paste it on layout pages. And it worked pretty well, and then, you know, one of us would drive the pages to the printing plant. Although I have to admit, you know, talking about how crazy production night is, this was late one spring when we were about to have the ceremonial handing over the New Hampshire to the next staff. And I suspect that, you know, on our last night we may have been drinking beer. And New Hampshire, the state of New Hampshire had just voted to raise the drinking age by a year. And of course, our lead headline the next day read, New Hampshire votes to lower the drinking age, which was wishful thinking, I guess. But that was just one of those headlines that got written at 3 in the morning, and none of us were paying real close attention. So, and of course, it makes a good story now. You know, it's. But production night was always fun. I mean, there were a few. You know, obviously, it is over 30 years ago. But you know, there were a few of us who loved Warner Brothers cartoons. You know, and we'd always do especially after midnight, we'd start doing our favorite bits to each other. You know, it's like, you know, the Bugs Bunny cartoon where, you know, it's like, all right, Clancy, take the boys and surround the house, you know, and just, you know, you know, we had fun. Do you guys do Warner Brothers cartoons? Or,
Not to that extent, but we do plenty of funny stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and of course, the one thing we used to do, which of course was totally insane, given that the office was just full of papers. This was still when we had glue guns to paste copy for the typesetter to type. And we would lay glue gun trails through the office and basically go up to someone who was a little excitable. And then, of course, somebody would produce a match. And that glue trail just burns really nice. It just snakes through the office, and we'd get a nice yelp out of like a woman named Janet Prince, who'd go, "Ee!" Fortunately, we never burned ourselves up. Yes.
Hey, Dana, can you please talk a little bit about your adventure in fiction writing? Jumping over to the other side.
Yeah, I mean, I always wanted to write fiction, and the reason I ended up in journalism was that I was kind of practical. I wanted to have a job. Coming from a working class family, the idea of not having a job just didn't make any sense. And it wasn't like I was going to be supported by my parents while I found myself. So back in 1982-83, my wife and I spent a year in Paris. She was getting a degree, a master's degree in French from Middlebury, and she being a upper middle class Jew from New Jersey, and me not, she had savings. She had money, not a lot, but she said, we can either buy a house in New Hampshire or we can spend a year in France. And I said, well, it's your money. And so we spent a year in France. And so I wrote a couple drafts of my first novel, which actually grew out of a short story that I wrote for Tom Williams. It was a story that he liked a lot. And then when we came back, I started my job at the Wall Street Journal. And then I was put in touch with a wonderful editor at Ticknor and Fields, which was part of Houghton Mifflin, named Cork Smith. And Cork was a guy who, he edited William Kennedy. Cork actually edited Gravity's Rainbow by Pynchon. My first novel was nothing like Gravity's Rainbow. But he was an old-fashioned bookman. And I showed him a couple chapters of my novel. This happened in December of '86. He said, show me a couple more chapters as good as these and give me an outline and we'll publish your book. And I said, okay. And it happened. It was, I don't have any of those fiction writing horror stories. Well, kind of after being printed, I have those horror stories, but none of the 5 manuscripts sitting in the basement. And I ended up writing a couple novels for him, and then a novel for another editor at Harcourt named Drenko Willen. And then, to be honest, my job intensified, my sons were getting older, and I took a break. But what's interesting now is, the ideas I have for my books now are nonfiction ideas, and the book that came out in 2008, which is partly a memoir and it's partly about country music, it's called Sing Me Back Home, Love, Death, and Country Music. And I really, even though it's nonfiction, it really uses the techniques of fiction. I'm able to draw on what I learned writing those 3 novels and apply it to my nonfiction. And I still get a sheepish grin on my face when I admit this, but I have a dog book coming out in November. And it grew out of my blog. I wrote a post about, our miniature poodle wasn't doing well when I was in the middle of treatment, and I just wrote a post about, even though I wasn't feeling great, it made me feel bad that Bijou didn't seem to be feeling great either. And within a week, half a dozen publishers contacted my agent and said, "You need to write a dog book." I mean, it would never have occurred to me to write a dog book. And Doubleday made a great offer. And so on November 2nd, and just in time for the holidays, you can get What a Difference a Dog Makes, Big Lessons on Life, Love, and Healing from a Small Pooch. And believe me, there was a lot of tap dancing involved in writing that book.
Is that a memoir one too?
Yeah, it's about, I mean, it's really, it's about, partly, it's a little bit about cancer and it's a lot about Bijou. And my publishers are hoping that it's a cross between Marley and Me and The Last Lecture, except Bijou and I are still alive. Yeah. And I wouldn't object to that. But yeah, it's a memoir. Yes, Phyllis?
You talked about your early years in local journalism. And did I hear you say that you also worked for the Manchester Union Leader?
Yeah, I spent 2 years at the Union Leader.
Yeah, you want to talk about that a little bit, about what it was like?
Well, it was funny. I wasn't too affected by the its editorial page policies or Loeb's attitude about journalism. Actually, William Loeb died while I was there, and I had nothing to do with it. But it was a great job. I was a kid reporter. I covered 8 towns on the Route 101 corridor. I covered Auburn, Candia, Deerfield, Chester, Fremont, Raymond, Brentwood, Epping, and it was great fun. I mean, I could do everything from covering a fire and a murder to hanging out in the pits at New England Dragway and doing a feature on a guy named Big Daddy Don Garlitz, who was one of the great drag racers of the 20th century. And plus I had to take photographs. So it was great. I mean, it was having absolute freedom to do whatever I wanted, and all my editor cared about was that, at the end of the week, he had a bunch of stories from me with my name on them.
How do you feel that what you went through in the earlier years is different from what young people who are graduating from journalism programs today face in these small town newspapers?
Yeah, I think there are fewer of those papers, unfortunately, and one of the reasons that those papers were and are so important is they do let you do everything. You really you really gain a wide breadth of experience. You have to know how to cover a fire. No matter whether you think you're the next Saul Bellow. Mr. Bellow, we need someone to cover that fire, and but you also got a chance to to stretch out too. And I think there are aspects of the web that'll let young journalists do that. I think with the right entrepreneurial spirit that young journalists can really find enough advertising to make it worth their while to do kind of micro local journalism on the web. But they're going to have to pick their spots, and in a way I think today's the students who are graduating this year and the coming years are going to have to be smarter and more entrepreneurial than we were. John.
A blog question, actually. When you started your series of articles, the Times did 2 5-minute or 4-minute videos.
Mm-hmm.
They're fairly high production values. So they sent a film crew out and they spent some money on it. Were those done specifically for the blogs, for that section of the website? They certainly weren't for print. So
yeah, no, they were. They wanted to get me on film to complement the blog, and even though I have a I mean, you know, I don't need to brag about the Times, but our website is really good. I mean, there's more, you know, there's more on our website on a given day than you can possibly take in, and you just have to pick your spots. Yeah.
I was wondering, because even though I don't even know if there's a chance that anyone will be reading what I'm writing, I seem to want to polish everything that I put on paper, and in a way I'm not true in what I'm writing. And I was wondering how you found, or maybe it's the innate writer in you, how you found the way to be truthful or honest about things that were happening in your writing, and not want to seem to polish them every time they come onto paper.
Well, I guess first, you know, I do have to say that, you know, as a columnist, you know, I am polishing the sentences. I mean, it's, you know, I can't, I'm too compulsive to kind of do, you know, kind of the cliche of a blog as being, you know, first draft spewing. But I simply decided at the beginning that what prompted me to write was not finding the writing I wanted to read. And so I decided I wanted to write the kind of writing that I wanted to read. And I felt like I needed to be as honest as possible about the details. And you know, and always in a good piece of writing, it's about the details. And I feel like, you know, in each column, you know, I try to give the reader details that only I or a fellow patient would know. And you know, so I guess I don't polish the emotion. I mean, I try to keep the emotion raw and true, but I certainly polish the words, if that makes sense.
We have time for one more question.
Yeah.
Could you talk about how book publishing has changed?
I'm actually more optimistic about book publishing than I have been in a long time, and really it's because of e-readers. You know, I think there's a real potential for e-readers like Kindle to do for book publishing what the paperback did in the 20th century. I mean, you know, publishing is still a weird place. They're still looking for the blockbuster, you know, which makes everyone whine, except of course if you happen to be the blockbustee. But in an odd way, you know, more books than ever are being published, you know, legitimately published. And I actually feel more optimistic about publishing than I do about magazines and newspapers. Well, thanks a lot, everybody. Thank you. Thanks.